This is an overview of Economics Chapter 10, Consumer Choice and Behavioral Economics. So we're going to talk about utility and consumer decision-making, where demand curves come from, social influences on decision-making, and behavioral economics. Do people make their choices rationally? So defining utility. In our study of consumers so far, we have looked at what they do, but not why they do what they do. Economics is all about the choices people make. A better understanding of those choices furthers our understanding of economic behavior. At the same time, we need to know our limits of our understanding. This chapter will examine what we know and what we can't explain about how consumers behave. Rationality and its implications. So, as a starting point, economists assume that consumers are rational, making choices intended to make themselves as well off as possible. I see this all the time. Consumers are not rational. You can present them with very rational information that says, do not make this decision. It's not going to make you better off. And yet I see people make that decision, whether that's buying things they can't afford or, irrational investing decisions or any of these things. We examine the choices that when consumers make their decisions about how much of various items to buy given their scarce resources, income. Facing this budget constraint, how do people choose? By definition, a budget constraint is the limited amount of income available to consumers to spend on goods and services. Economists refer to the enjoyment or satisfaction that people obtain from consuming goods and services as utility. Utility cannot be directly measured, but for now, suppose that we could. What would we see? Assume people consume more of an item, say pizza. Their total utility would change. If you're really hungry, the first slice of pizza brings you a lot of utility, right? The amount of the total utility would change when consuming an extra unit. So the extra unit is called marginal utility. So margin means additional in economics. So when I think about it, the first slice individually brings me a certain amount of utility. The second slice, not as much marginal utility as the first slice, right? And then by the sixth slice, it's not bringing me utility at all. I probably feel ill. We generally expect to see the first items consumed produce the most marginal utility, so that subsequent items give diminishing marginal utility. This is the law of diminishing marginal utility. It's the principle that consumers experience diminishing additional satisfaction as they consume more of a good or service during a given time period. Slice 2 is all right. Slice 3 is not as much as 1 and 2, and then by 4, 5, or 6, I'm not getting any utility, right? So the table shows the utility you might derive from eating pizza on Super Bowl Sunday. The number of units, or in utils, represents happiness. The higher, the better. A graph of utility is initially shown to rising quickly, then more slowly, then it turns downward, as in you get sick of eating pizza. So first slice, a lot of utility. Second slice, almost as much, then less, then even less. And then we reach our peak, and then it starts going down, our total utility. The increase from one utility to the next is marginal utility of a slice of pizza. We can calculate the utility for every slice of pizza. So on slice number 1, it was 20. On slice number 2, our total is 36, so that means it's 16, the difference between 20 and 36, and so on. And by the time you get to 6 slices of pizza, it's minus 3. So this is the graph of the actual marginal utility. This is total utility. So given unlimited resources, a consumer would consume every good and service up until the maximum total utility. But resources are scarce. Consumers have a budget constraint. This is the limited amount of income available to spend on goods and services. The concept of utility helps us figure out how much of each item to purchase. Each item purchased gives some possibly negative marginal utility. By dividing the unit price of the item, we obtain the marginal utility per dollar spent. That is, the rate at which that item allows the consumer to transfer money into utility. So now this is going to talk about the total utility and marginal utility from eating pizza and drinking Coke. Suppose now you can obtain utility by eating pizza and drinking Coke. This table gives you a total and a marginal derived from each item. So at 1 slice of pizza, you get 20. At 1 cup of Coke, you also get 20. At 2 slices of pizza, your marginal utility for the second slice is 16. At 2 cups of Coke, it's 15. So let's convert that. Suppose a pizza costs $2 per slice and a Coke $1 per cup. The marginal utility of pizza per dollar is just marginal utility of pizza divided by 2. And Coke is divided by 1. So let's look at this, because we're always looking to maximize what we get for our money. The combination, 1 slice of pizza, 3 cups of Coke, you spent $5, your total utility is 65. So our maximum utility is 3 slices of pizza and 4 cups of Coke. And that cost us $10, but we got utility of 96. If we go all the way up to 4 slices of pizza and 5 cups of Coke, we're not getting a lot of return for the extra slice of pizza and the extra cup of Coke. Law of diminishing marginal utility, right? So suppose the marginal utility per dollar obtained from pizza was greater than for Coke. Then you should eat more pizza and drink less Coke. This implies the rule of equal marginal utility per dollar spent. Consumers should look to equalize their quote-unquote bang for the buck. Some combinations satisfy this rule. This rule are given above. The actual combination to purchase would depend on your budget constraint. With $5 to spend, you would have 1 slice of pizza and 3 cups of Coke, producing the most utility. At $10, you would purchase 3 slices of pizza and 4 cups of Coke. In each case, you exhaust your budget, since spending additional money gives you more utility. So this gives us 2 conditions for maximizing utility. Satisfy the rule of equal marginal utility per dollar spent. Marginal utility of pizza divided by price per pizza equals the marginal utility of Coke divided by price per Coke. Spending on pizza and spending on Coke equals your budget. What if we disobey the rule? It should be clear that failing to spend all of your money will result in less utility. But each item you buy increases your utility. But what if you buy a combination that doesn't satisfy the rule of equal marginal utility per dollar? For example, you buy 4 slices of pizza and 2 cups of Coke for $10. It would give you 87 utils, less than the 96 you would get from the 3 slices of pizza and 4 cups of Coke. The marginal utility per dollar on the 4th slice is 3 utils. The marginal utility on the 2nd cup of Coke is 15. Since you do get more marginal utility per dollar from Coke, you ought to buy more Coke and less pizza. And indeed, that would increase utility. What happens if price changes? If the price changes from $2 to $1.50, then the rule will no longer be satisfied. You must adjust your purchasing decision. We can think of this adjustment in 2 ways. You can afford more than before. This is like having higher income. Or pizza has become cheaper relative to Coke. We refer to the effect of number 1 as the income effect, and the effect of number 2 as the substitution effect. The income effect is the change in quantity demanded of a good that results from the effect of a change in price on a consumer's purchasing power, holding all other factors constant. We know that some goods are normal goods, goods that we consume more of as our income rises, and some goods are inferior goods. When I think of normal goods, it could be, a nice restaurant or getting your nails done or something like that. When I think of inferior goods, I think of like ramen noodles, things like that. If pizza is a normal good, the income effect of its price decreasing will cause you to consume more pizza. If it's inferior, the income effect of its price will cause you to consume less pizza. Is pizza a normal or inferior good for you? I like pizza, so I guess it kind of depends on convenience. It's not really based on the price of pizza, but given the choice, I'd rather, with my budget, if convenience is taken out of it, eat something other than pizza. The substitution effect is the change in quantity demanded of a good that results in the change of the price, making the good more or less expensive relative to other goods, holding constant the effect of price change on consumers' purchasing power. If the price of pizza falls, pizza becomes cheaper relative to Coke. The opportunity cost of consuming a slice of pizza falls. Therefore, we should eat more pizza. So this is just a graph that talks about it. When a price decreases and your consumer purchasing power increases, then you increase then the income effect would increase the quantity demanded for a normal good and decrease for an inferior good. The substitution effect is the cost of consuming the good is the decrease in the price decreases, which causes the quantity of the goods demanded to increase. Now, when price increases, opposite's going to happen, right? Consumer purchasing power decreases, and that means we decrease the quantity demanded for a normal good and increase for an inferior good. The substitution effect is when there is a price increase, this causes the quantity of the good to be demanded to decrease because we're going to substitute something for it. Adjusting optimal consumption to a lower price of pizza. Suppose the pizza falls to $1.50 per slice. A possible new combination of 4 slices of pizza and 4 cups of Coke at $10. The marginal utility per dollar is not quite equal, but it's as close as we can get without allowing fractional goods. So where does demand curve come from? Recall the law of demand. Whenever the price of a product falls, the quantity demanded increases. Think about you as a consumer. We are now in a position to see why this happens from an individual by considering the income and substitution effect. The substitution effect tells us that the product has become relatively cheaper, so we consume more of it. The income effect tells us that our income is effectively higher, so at least for normal goods, we consume more of it. So deriving the market demand from the individual demand curves. So this is your demand curve for pizza, right? At $1.50, we would have 4 slices. This is David's demand curve for pizza. At $1.50, he would have 6 slices. And this is Lori's demand curve. At $1.50, she would have 5 slices. So as you can see, each individual has a demand curve for pizza. This is why it's much harder to predict than we think. By adding the individual demand at each price, we obtain the market demand. So the market demand is all of us, assuming we're the only people in the market, right? For a demand curve to be upward sloping, the good would have to be an inferior good, making it a very large portion of a consumer's budget with a greater income effect than substitution. A 2006 economic experiment revealed that for poor regions in China, decrease in the price of rice led to some very poor people consuming less rice. A good with an upward sloping demand curve is called a Geffen good. In most standard economic models, people are assumed to make choices independently of each other. Such models sometimes incorrectly predict consumer behavior by ignoring social aspects. The utilities from drugs, crime, going bowling depends on whether your friends and neighbors take drugs, commit crimes, or go bowling. So we need to think about what are the social influences. This is why people get celebrities to endorse products, right? Celebrity endorsements. Firms use celebrities regularly. They work because consumers might believe the celebrity knows more about the product than I do, or by buying this product, I will become more like the celebrity. Then there's network externality situations. This is a situation in which the usefulness of a product increases by the number of consumers who use it. Think about Facebook, Blu-rays, dating apps. If I was the only one on the dating app, how would it be useful? No, but if there's 1 million people on the dating app, it has much more use. Other things in social influences is fairness. People like to be treated fairly and prefer to treat each other fairly, even if it's bad for them financially. People tend to tip their servers, even if they never plan to go back to the restaurant. I said this last time. I had a bad massage, and I tipped really well. And I was like, well, it is what it is, right? Smart businesses learn from this and attempt to appear fair even when it will cost them profits. The NFL sells tickets to the Super Bowl at $800 to $2,000, but these tickets are resold for much more. Surveys reveal that NFL fans would consider it unfair if the NFL raised the ticket price. Instead, fans believe the current system of randomly distributing tickets to applicants is fairer. The NFL forgoes potential profit to avoid alienating fans. So to talk about experimental economics, over the past 2 decades, some economists have emulated psychologists by performing laboratory experiments on human subjects. This is known as experimental economics. People are recruited to participate in these experiments and rewarded with money for their performance in efforts to mimic real-world decision-making scenarios. This happens a lot in financial behavioral economics or behavioral finance. A common laboratory game is shown on the right, the ultimatum game. An allocator decides how to split $20 between her and a recipient. The recipient accepts, in which each case receives the allocated split, or rejects, in which case receives nothing. How would you play this game? If no one cares about fairness, offer them 1 cent, and they would accept. But in real life, allocators usually offer 40% to the recipient, and recipients offered usually reject, less than 10% reject. Why do people act this way? The alternative version of the game is called the dictator game. Now, the recipient cannot reject. When 161 Cornell students played this game and were only allowed a $10 split or a 10 and 10 and 18 and 2, 122 chose the 10 and 10. People believe fairness is important. So the dollar amounts chosen may not be large enough to generate real-world behavior. As the amount in question goes up, people tend to be less generous with their offer and reject unfair offers less. People tend to choose middle, quote-unquote, actions when one is available. In the dictator game, if people can also take the money from their partner, they often do so and rarely give any. People are less likely to give away money when they feel entitled to. If subjects work for a short period of time to earn their money in the dictator game, they are much less likely to give or take anything. Is Uber price gouging? This is a great question. Is Uber, the taxi-like app, Uber charges a surcharge pricing. This is like based on supply and demand of rides at the time that you're trying to get a ride. A ride on New Year's Eve costs 8 times as much as a ride on a regular night. Do you think this is fair? I don't know. I mean, it makes sense to me because you can charge that much when people are willing to pay it. On other nights, on a random Monday, they might not be willing to pay that. So, supply and demand. In recent years, some economists have started studying the situation in which people make choices that do not appear economically rational. It happens all the time. This is behavioral economics. 3 common mistakes made by consumers: taking into account monetary costs but ignoring non-monetary opportunity costs, failing to ignore sunk costs, this is huge, and being unrealistic about their own future behavior, also huge. So number 1, ignoring non-monetary costs. People often treat monetary and non-monetary costs differently, even though they're both opportunity costs. People who won the NFL lottery for Super Bowl tickets were asked the following 2 questions. If you had not won the lottery, would you be willing to pay $3,000 for the ticket? If after winning someone offered you $3,000, would you have sold it? Traditionally, economists believe that if you answer no to the first question, then you should answer yes to the second question. Both questions rely on the value of the ticket being $3,000. People did not answer that way. 94% said they wouldn't have paid $3,000, but 92% said they wouldn't sell it for $3,000 either. Behavioral economics refer to this as the endowment effect, the tendency of people to be unwilling to sell a good they already own if they are offered a price that is greater than the price they would be willing to pay for it if they didn't already own it. In simpler terms, people don't like losing what they have. They consider losing an object to hurt them more than gaining a similar object would help them. So this happens all the time in tough financial situations in the stock market. People act irrationally and they sell at the bottom of the market because the losing idea hurts so much. It outweighs winning. Failing to ignore sunk cost. A sunk cost is a cost that has already been paid and cannot be recovered. Once you have paid the money and can't get it back, you should ignore that money in future decision making, but people allow past costs to influence future decisions. NFL teams persist with first-round pick quarterbacks much longer than later-round picks with similar performance because they have quote-unquote paid for the first-rounder. Admitting mistakes and moving on is crucial, but people often found this very difficult to do so. In 2000, Arnold Kim began blogging about Apple products. By 2008, his site had become very successful and he was earning more than $100,000 per year from paid advertisements. Sounds good, right? The problem was Kim was a medical doctor who had invested $200,000 in his education. What should he do? He believed he would ultimately make more as a blogger than a doctor, but committing to blogging full-time would mean wasting, quote-unquote, his education. Kim realized his education costs were sunk, unrecoverable regardless of his career choice. He went with what he wanted to do, blog full-time. Could you have made the same choice? People often make decisions that are inconsistent with their long-run intentions. For example, in 2010, 69% of smokers reported wanting to quit, and 52% actually attempted to quit. But despite their intentions, very few actually quit. They found it hard to control their future behavior. Economists try to understand this by arguing that many people have preferences that are not consistent over time. Short-run preferences are often not consistent with long-run preferences. So our theory of utility maximization suggests that we should compare marginal utility per dollar spent on every item we buy. When you go grocery shopping buying dozens of items, do you really do this? The answer is no. Does this invalidate our theory? Traditional economists answer no, because its unrealistic assumptions are necessary to simplify complex decision-making problems in order to focus on the most important factors. Models are best judged by the success of their predictions rather than the accuracy of their assumptions. Indeed, models like our standard are quite successful in predicting many types of consumer behavior, but not all. Behavioral economists say that it does matter that consumers do not usually make optimal consumption choices. They believe modeling how people actually make decisions is important. Some important irrational conceptual behaviors include rule of thumb, making general rules that often but not always produce optimal decision results. This can save on decision-making time. Anchoring, irrelevant information can influence behavior. Posting. So an example, posting limit 10 per customer will often induce people to buy 10 even if they would have bought fewer without the sign. When Ron Johnson became the CEO of JCPenney, he instituted a new pricing strategy of everyday low prices instead of artificially high regular prices with normal sale prices. He thought consumers saw through the artificial pricing, but the new strategy resulted in people buying less and Johnson being fired. This is an example of anchoring. The regular price acts as an anchor that people believe that they're getting a good deal. This happens all the time. And we're not going to cover the budget. So that's it for chapter 10.